And welcome in to, I mean, it's an extremely sweet edition of Kickin' It. I'm Jeff Woody here with Grant Mahoney. We're brought to you by Kelderman Manufacturing, kelderman.com. Do you think you could laser cut a sign that says 20 to 19?
No doubt.
I just put it a yard sign. And if you're neighbors with an Iowa fan, put it on your property so they can't remove it, but put it as close to the property line as you can.
Facing their house.
Facing their house. I think just politely. I mean, it's 2 out of 3, last 2 at Kinnick. I think we actually do have a special guest to summarize the game, I think, better than we have. So come on in.
It was awesome. I mean, I don't know if you guys say, but I think the game lived up to the hype every little bit. It was a lot of fun playing in this, and I think the rivalry is back. I mean, both teams are great teams for the state of Iowa, but at the end of the day, we all know it's a cyclone state.
Thanks, George. Oh, God bless George Niang. Thanks. See you next time. See you during basketball season. Man, what a fun game, Grant.
Well, first half wasn't so fun.
Yeah, no, that's true. It was a fun second half. What a fun finish to that game, Grant.
Yes, what a fun finish for sure.
I feel like we have to just have Grant Stradamus here. You were texting. You kind of, I don't know if you didn't gloat it, but I think everyone was thinking it. That was a part of the picks column because there's a group text that Connor will send out that says, "Hey, what are your picks for the game?" I think Rob Gray notated it after the game. Like it was almost exactly. Aiden, do you have you want to read Grant's pick from the actual, and it's up on the screen for those visual listeners.
This is from Grant Mahoney. I didn't get much from either team's first game other than Jalen Knoll, Jaden Higgins, and Rocco Becht are dogs. That's all caps, dogs. And Iowa fans started booing their offense after the first few 3-and-out drives of their game. I think ISU leads 14-9 at half. It's a little shaky to start.
A little close, just inverted.
Iowa scores one of their first drives to open the second half to go up 16-14. No one scores again until Kyle Cash Money. Are we definitive? It's Konrardy?
Konrardy?
I think it's Konrardy.
Very Irish.
Because he took a video of himself and said, "Hey, it's Kyle Konrardy here."
Konrardy. Yeah, let's go Konrardy.
So
it's an Irish.
Konrardy. Anyway, hammers home a 52-yarder as the clock expires, giving the Clones a 17-16 victory and an all-timer, returning the Cy-Hawk Trophy to its rightful home. Iowa State 17, Iowa 16.
Pretty damn close.
Close.
Pretty damn close.
That's how I know Mauser listens to our show, because he knew when we got the ball with 34 seconds left that he's going to do what he can to set Kyle Konrardy up for a 52-yarder. Just happened to be a 54-yarder.
Yeah, I mean, they did take a 13-0 trailing deficit into the half, so they didn't quite get 14-9. But man, I think the biggest, like all silliness aside, the main theme of that game was that Iowa State, they were the tougher team and they executed better. And
that's what Campbell said too. Yeah. They were the tougher team for longer.
And in years past, that hasn't been the case. Nope. Like against last year, 2023, Iowa was the better executing team. They had better offensive drives. They scored when they needed to. They got a pick six. They forced mistakes. They took advantage of those mistakes. Iowa was the better team last year. Iowa State was the better team this year. And I don't know.
Sans the first quarter.
But like over the course of the whole game, they were the better teams. Like my gut reaction was that Iowa State, there was not equal parts. There was some part Iowa losing it, but it was a more predominance of Iowa State winning. And that was my takeaway.
Yeah. I mean, I took notes at halftime, and the intention that I had coming into the show was very much different than what the outcome was. I thought Iowa State came out, they looked scared. Looked like they'd shit their pants. The crowd was getting to them. False starts.
North end zone is really loud. To their credit, that north end zone is super, super loud.
It is. False starts. Obviously Rocco threw the pick, and you go back and rewatch that, and Eli Green was wide open, which is easier. Hindsight's 2020. Eli Green was wide open, running a seam down the hash, and if Rocco would have hit him in stride, it would have been a 90-yard touchdown. But it's like you said, that north end zone is tough. Perkins has had sure hands, for forever, and he bobbled a couple snaps, got some nukes off, but didn't handle them, very well at first.
Yeah. I think the other general feeling that I had, instead, other than like the bad start, good finish thing, I have, so a lot of the, so at the gym, I coach Mondays and Thursday mornings. So I'm there for 3 hours, see probably, maybe 20 people a class. So what, 20 people, maybe 10 people. So anyway, 50 people. Of those, 10 are like diehard Hawkeye fans. And of the conversations that I've had today with Hawkeye fans, there is an argument. There are a couple arguments that I feel like need to get addressed just right out of the gate, which is my conversation with them went something like this. I would say, because a few of them were there, what was the stadium like? And they're all, it was whatever. Fans were mad. Iowa sucks, or something like that. And implicit in that argument of Iowa sucks is that Iowa State isn't good enough to beat them unless Iowa sucks.
Fire Kirk. Saw that a bunch.
So with that argument, that means that the people that allowed Iowa State to come back are bad. So everyone points the finger at Cade. Cade didn't play very well, but that's not super shocking news. But arguably the biggest plays of the game were the 75-yard touchdown to Jalen Noel.
He just dusted Wampa.
And well, I'll get to that.
Okay.
And then there's also the 25-yarder up the sideline that put him in field goal position for Konrardy to actually hit the game winner.
Yep.
So those two plays were, I would say that and the pick would be the first interception that Iowa State got off of Cade McNamara.
I think that was the turning point for Iowa State.
Right. So let's take that one off the board because everyone's, Iowa sucks. Okay, let's even. I tweeted for the first time in like a year and a half to dissuade that one. So
you see my response?
He still stinks.
Yeah. Wasn't a good read. He stinks.
But so let's say that the argument of Iowa stinks. Then that means anyone who screwed up stinks. So Cade McNamara stinks.
Duh.
Well, in those two plays that are the quintessential things that made the game happen for Iowa State to win. As a lesson in leadership, I love Jay Higgins is one of my favorite players in the country. The middle linebacker for Iowa. He is fantastic. And also a lesson in leadership. His job on that, he said it in his post-game press conference. The reason why Iowa gets so many interceptions is because their safeties can sit aggressively on top of any route because they trust their linebackers to collision the receivers before they get to full stride. And by collision, it literally means just run into them. Make it so they have to move their route around where they want to, or they get hit, or they stop, all within 5 yards. But even if the linebacker's not covering that guy, they have to hit him on their way to where they're going to get to. Jay Higgins, everyone was trashing Xavier Wongpa, which of course he didn't do exceptionally well on that play, but Iowa
He got benched.
He did, yeah. But again, yeah, cool. But on that play, in general, Iowa safeties sit on top of routes because they trust their linebackers to do the job. Jay Higgins whiffed.
Sure did.
Completely whiffed on Jalen Noel. And so if Iowa sucks, Jay Higgins sucks. I mean, so that's one, which is obviously false. He might be the best linebacker in the country. Number two, that play that Jalen Noel took it up the sideline. Who did he run that route against?
Castro.
Sebastian Castro. Might be the best safety in the country.
And
so
he set that up to play before.
He set it up to play before, and there was another play earlier in the game where there was a corner. It was like number 27 was the one that jumped it. And so Higgins knew how long he had to commit that route to. So if Jalen Noel beat Jay Higgins, potentially the best linebacker in America, and beat Sebastian Castro, an All-American at safety, at defensive back, nickel, corner, whatever, he can play anything. If Iowa sucks, Sebastian Castro and Jay Higgins suck. That argument doesn't hold water. What's actually true, Iowa State might just be good. So like the other part of this argument, I just have to get this off my chest. If the argument is Iowa sucks, would you feel the same way? I'm not saying that Iowa State is Ohio State or Alabama, but if Iowa was playing Ohio State or Alabama and the exact same sequence of events happened, would Iowa fans be as mad, or would they go, well, you know what? Ohio State's going to get theirs. But the feeling of Iowa sucks implies that Iowa State's not good enough to beat Iowa unless Iowa sucks, which is inherently false. Iowa State won that game because they made plays on Iowa's best players when they needed to. Yeah, Iowa didn't answer when they needed to, but that doesn't matter. Iowa State beat their best when they needed to be their best. And I think to me, that was the biggest thing, is the most irritating conversation is Iowa sucks. They don't. Iowa State's best players played big when they needed to and made plays and caused them to win the game.
Yeah, big-time players make big-time plays in big-time situations, and Iowa State players made big-time plays in big-time situations. So I think, in what you're saying, that Iowa fans saying that Iowa sucks, they are doing that because they can't fathom Iowa State is good. They can't say Iowa State's good, because that hurts them. That hurts them too much to admit Iowa State's good.
You're the same way, though. I would say that.
Yes, very much so. Avery Johnson's not good though.
I'm more towards that banner. I'm not on that banner. I'm more towards that banner.
Yeah, and I think McNamara might actually be left-handed. He should try it next game. But to that point, Iowa State's receivers are going to be the best wide receivers that Iowa face outside of Ohio State.
Yeah.
Higgins and Knoll are absolute Knoll has had 135 yards and a touchdown, 133 yards against Iowa in a touchdown. He's playing at an all Big 12 level. I'm biased in saying he's playing like an all-American level.
You're not biased in saying he is playing at an all-American level.
But he's not getting the national recognition he deserves because he's not playing for an Ohio State and Alabama and Oregon. He plays for Iowa State. I'm okay with that because you're not going to find a better three-man combination in the conference between Rockerbeck, Jaden Higgins, and Jalen Knoll.
The only one that would compete with it, but it's just a 1 and a 2, is McMillan and Fafita with Arizona.
Just 1 and 2.
But I don't know who their second guy is. You get as full of an option set, and Bramer is still just kind of getting healthy. And he had one super important catch in that game, which was a first down. I mean, it was a dart. That thing was, I don't think it went up or down an inch.
He took a hit. That's where he beat Iowa, though, was in the seam with the tight end. We've been saying that. I've heard people saying it all week. I feel like that's one of the few times we went there. But he got hit, and then he drug a guy a few yards. I mean, that was big. This bye week is coming at the perfect time.
Oh,
though.
Perfect time. It's Iowa State's beat up. I think.
And that was a physical game, too.
Oh, for sure. And I think the other thing that was kind of the general consensus with Iowa fans is that, like, Iowa's offense can't, like, Tim Lester called a bad game, which kind of. But if you look at, okay, so I just want to go through the third quarter. So
one thing I do want to say, though, on the pick that McNamara threw, they put that play in because Texas ran the exact same play against Iowa State last year. Spacing was different. Quinn Ewers wasn't rushed as much as McNamara was, but Texas ran that same kind of, and you broke it down really well on Twitter where the tight end was on the right side, kind of got lost in the muck and then ran a wheel route up the sideline.
We had that play. Ernst Run and Hollywood were two beneficiaries of that play on several occasions. We called it Y Hide.
Yeah, and Texas ran that play last year versus Iowa State, wide open for a touchdown. That was the play that Iowa ran. I'm sure they saw that play last year and they thought, okay, this is a perfect time to call it. They ran it, and Porter played the best game of his life. That was his best game of his career. Made a hell of a play on it.
And without Darian Porter, so again, just if you want a more breakdown on that, you can just watch the videos. JWoody32 on Twitter. I have a grand total of 6 tweets since 2022. But that play existed because Porter recognized film study, understood what they were going to do, left his assignment, and was quote in the wrong spot. And so with McNamara, he couldn't have seen him because, like, you don't have time. Like 1001, 1002, he had to throw it in that, and you can't see 12 guys. You're looking at who is responsible for Lachey. It's the line. I think it was Brzezina or whoever. It might have been 47, whoever it was. And one of the linebackers got past.
It was Ebel.
And so 47 got run by. Lachey was 6 yards past Ebel, and whoever the safety was, I don't know which one it was. I think it was Verdun. So there was no one within 10 yards of him on either side. 6 yards on one side and 10 yards on the other side. So McNamara, who's getting pressured, you can't step in and throw. You're booting to one side, you're throwing to the other, you're going to get hit. Put it anywhere in his vicinity, in his brain, that play is going to get completed. But Darian Porter made a play. Iowa didn't lose that. Iowa State won that.
Well, and I will say too that McNamara, when he rolled out, he did see that there was pressure. His eyes were glued on the guy in the middle of the field. I think Gill, which actually is a pretty good receiver. I was impressed by him.
Yeah.
I thought he did pretty well.
Yep.
His eyes were glued on him until the last second. He looked at Lachey. He didn't see Porter coming in, and he threw it. And then as soon as he threw it, Porter made a break on it and picked it.
Yeah,
great play.
Darian Porter had the game of his life.
That was the play of the game, though. That's what turned the momentum around. Because Iowa State started third quarter, 3 and out, punted it back, and then Iowa had good field position, and then that was the next play.
Yeah, it was the first play right after that punt, which I think they got the ball at the 46-ish yard line.
Yeah.
Which, while we're talking about field position, hidden yardage.
Oh boy. All right, Aiden, I'll let you go first.
What do we got, Aiden? What do you think? Hidden yardage.
This is gonna be pretty lopsided compared to last week. I'm gonna go.
And so again, refresher. This is only week 2. Hidden yardage, for those that don't know, is if wherever your team starts, let's say my team starts on the 20 and your team starts in the 30, we each have 10 drives. And that means every drive, I have to get 10 extra yards to even get to where you started your drive. So I would have 100 extra yards just to get to where you started. Those are hidden yards. So it's all about field position, which is almost always about special teams. Okay.
I'm going to go with Iowa plus 145.
Okay. Grant?
I'm not going to go that high. I'm going to go Iowa plus 112.
Iowa 181.
Frick. Aiden's 2-0.
That was almost Iowa out hidden yardage. They out sort of special teamed. They out Iowa'd Iowa State by 181 yards, which is an insane thing that Iowa State, again, that's part of the reason why the game all felt sort of out of reach. And it's why
that's what Iowa does almost every game.
to every game.
That's how they win.
And that's why you only won the game by 1. And we're so happy about it because Iowa's really hard to beat. Like, even unless you can just straight out knock them out. Like, if Iowa State played the way they did in the second half, in the first half, and you're putting up, what was it, 7.9 yards per play in the second half. If you did that the entire game, yes, you can win that. You can force them out of their game plan. But if Iowa has any say in how the game goes, they're going to win hidden yardage by a bazillion. And you just have to gain 181 yards. Iowa State, let me see what their total yardage was. Through the game totals. Iowa State had 361 yards, 181 hidden yardage. They had to gain like 50% of their yards was to get to where Iowa started. That's an insane amount. And that's what Iowa does, which is why it felt like the game was so much more out of control than it was when it was 13-0, because it never felt like Iowa State had any possession until that interception.
Yeah.
So once that interception happened, it was like, here's what we can do with field position. Here's what you can do with a little bit of momentum. Here's what you can do with a little bit of confidence. Go down and score right away.
Two things. I was telling our friends we were watching the game with that Iowa's just, they're a boa constrictor. They don't have an offense, and so they'll get to mid-yard, to midfield, and then they'll punt, pin you inside your 5. The defense will give up 15 yards. You punt it back, they're getting the ball at midfield, and then they just slowly will just milk it down the clock, and they just slowly,
Bring it out, ring it out.
Make you press, get you in the end zone, and it was intimidating. But that's how they beat you.
Yeah, and
unless you're playing Iowa State.
And Rocco has just a tremendous amount of calm. Like, what was even impressive to me,
great resilience by this team.
Great resilience by the team, and also just great. Okay, let's stay where we are.
Yep.
It was right now. What can I control? Was it good? Was it bad? I don't know. Doesn't matter. Can't change it now. After that first 10-yard, I think actually it was after the null play, goes out of bounds. I think Iowa calls timeout, and it's what? First and 10 from the inside of field goal range. They cut to a camera shot of Rocco talking to Campbell or Kempt or somebody like that. I don't remember who it was. And he just sort of looks like a guy at the water cooler who's just talking about like how his family barbecue was that weekend. Like, that's the demeanor that he had just after one of the most significant plays in recent Iowa State memory. And he's like, well, I mean, I guess I could go to Kohl's, and I mean, I have some Kohl's cash stored. I mean, like, that was sort of the tenor that he was sort of, his body language was. So never gets too far up, never gets too far down. And I think that's like the superpower of this offense through Rocco, is that nothing's ever too much and nothing's ever not enough.
My only irk and gripe would be is that
Grand Scripes.
Grand Scripes. I've said for so long that the way to beat Iowa is to be aggressive. And like the drive that Iowa State had to end the first half, they were aggressive and had a chance to score. That missed field goal was not on Konrardy.
That was a bad snap.
Snapper needs a hit. Perkins in the hands. I'm glad that though
hit him it was almost by his front knee,
his hip.
Yeah.
So like it was low. It was too in his body. But he bounced back. Had 2 great snaps on PATs. 2 great snaps on field goals.
The balls to snap that second one, that the game winner, like the catch, the snap and the catch, independent of the kick, because I feel like
Konrardy gets all the glory, which rightfully so. He made a long kick, but it's a 3-person operation. So when Konrardy gets shit on, I'm not shitting on the long snapper. It's a 3-person operation. Perkins does his best to get it down, but also you got to give him flowers when they have good snaps, which they did the next 4.
And then again, like the other thing that's just about the operation, I didn't know if they were going to get the kickoff in time because Konrardy didn't start taking his steps until I think 12 seconds left in the play clock, which
he was still looking up with 5 seconds. Like, we got to go.
Yeah. And so like, it's a long kick too. And so long kicks have to come off at a lower trajectory, which is why.
Not so. That's what they say. Okay. I didn't buy into that.
Okay. Anyway. So I don't know. When the play is getting snapped with 1 second left on the play clock, as a defensive or as a cover guy, I don't have to wait. Like, what am I going to do? Jump the snap count with 0 seconds? I'm not going to be offsides. You have to snap it or it's going to be offside. So you can jump it easier. No, so you're, as a snapper, your head's down. You're knowing that you're going to get hit in the back of the head. I mean, granted, it's a penalty, but you have to be accurate. You're going to get hit. Still was accurate. Perkins got the ball down. I mean, that thing was just true, and that thing would have been good from 65.
Yeah, so I mean, my two, if I had 2 game balls, I would give them to Darian Porter.
Yep.
Best game of his career, and then obviously Kyle Konrardy, which is cool because both those guys from Eastern Iowa, I'm sure they grew up.
Yeah,
Iowa,
one from
Iowa fans.
Bettendorf, one from Dubuque.
Yep. Konrardy was a walk-on. I'm sure he is no longer going to be one soon. So yeah, shout out to him.
I think the other thing that, back to the Iowa arguments that I was getting from just the conversations I was having was that, again, Cade sucks. Why are we throwing the ball? Why or whatever?
Wait, I want to give you a shout out too, because you said a big game plan would be Verdun shutting down Lachey. Lachey had no catches.
0 catches, 4 attempts. They're going to put 6'4", 225 that can run on 6'6", 250 that can run.
Yeah.
But so the Cade sucks argument, again, he didn't play well.
He sucks.
But Cade wasn't in coverage, and Cade didn't have to tackle. In the second half, Iowa State averaged, let me look it up, yards per play, 7.6 yards per play. Was Cade McNamara in coverage?
They were aggressive. That's how they scored, Jeff.
Now, granted, there's a 75-yard play. Yeah, sure was. It was touchdown. Can't remove that one. Iowa State can't remove any of Caleb Johnson's big plays, which I got to, again, you're not one to give compliments to Iowa players, but Caleb Johnson is the closest thing to me to Breece Hall that I've seen because of he runs the same way. It's
Jeff,
up.
I could have run through those holes.
No, you couldn't have.
I would have gotten 100 yards.
No, you
You ever see?
It's okay to say nice things.
You ever see my fake versus you and I? Boys got wheels.
Yeah, it's true, but you're not
High stepping.
You're not running into Dom Orange.
No, I'm not. he didn't either. He didn't run the Dom Orange. They was on the outside.
Yeah, he had like 4 or 5 runs over 25 yards.
One thing I want to say, why don't we run 4 down linemen? We heard about it all off season.
There was some. Just another just random, just things that I'm getting out of my brain, just because a lot of the things that I was wondering about is what happened between the third quarter and the fourth quarter. So through the third quarter, again, just pulling up, because there was such a segmented game. Like when you draw just little statistical lines and say before this point and after this point, through the third quarter, Iowa was rushing for 7.7 per carry. That is insane. And that's not, again, let's play the imaginary wand. Magic wand. I can just remove one of the plays from there. Iowa State gave up like 4 big runs. You can't just magic wand your way like that 75-yard touchdown saying, oh, well, every other play. So 7.7 yards per carry. In the fourth quarter, they rushed 13 times for 12 yards. That's 0.9 yards per carry.
Not very good.
What's the difference between the third quarter and the fourth quarter? John Haycock. Well, what did they do? The balls that John Haycock had to make the change that they did, which was normally the Iowa State defensive line plays a head up nose, which is usually Dom Orange, and then they play inside the tackles as opposed to inside the tackles, outside the guards, depending on which alignment you're going to be. But they were getting gashed in that. So, and then that's where your defensive linemen are. Your linebackers are playing out somewhere between the tackles and the next guy outside, whether it's tight end or a wide receiver, whatever. Well, when Iowa State was lined up between the guards and the tackles, Iowa's offensive line was doing a really good job, especially on their right side. When you're lined up between a guard and a tackle, it makes the combination block really easy to attain, where you're already between them. They just have to sandwich you shoulder to shoulder and push back, and then they just run that double team back into whoever they're running it into, with linebacker, safety, whomever. So what Iowa State did, and now where most of their runs were coming from, were off tackle. So Iowa State, they put their guy on their defensive lineman on the inside shoulder of their tackle, and Iowa was running successfully to the outside shoulder of their tackle. You would think that the adjustment is to get a bigger guy in that gap. They went the opposite direction. I mean, Chris has mentioned it a couple times in a couple podcasts, but what their change was, they played head up on their center. So they put Dom Orange or J.R. Singleton looking eye to eye with the Iowa center. They then, on obvious rundowns, they didn't do it on like 3rd and long or 2nd and 12, but on obvious rundowns, first down when you're trying to run the clock out, they put Tyler Onyedem and whoever the other player was at that time, or Trent Jones, whoever it was, the other 2 defensive linemen, basically head up with the guards. So they went tighter. They went away from where Iowa was actually having success from. So that's change number one. Change number two was they told the outside linebackers, I'm guessing, something to the effect of, I don't give a shit if you make a tackle. You need to take the tight end's sternum into the C-gap. You need to take, Cooper Ebel, you take your right shoulder and put it through Addison Ostranga's chest and smash him into the C-gap. Our safeties will make the tackle. You need to close that gap down with someone else.
And they brought a safety up.
And then that safety scraped over top of it. So what those two changes did is you're basically now one-on-one. Those combination blocks that the tackle and the guard would be able to get on an Onyedem when he was playing between them, that tackle can't come down that fast because Onyedem is getting right into that guard's chest. So now it's basically 3 one-on-ones, guard, center, guard, with Iowa State's defensive line, and they're counting on one of those three, at least one of those three, winning. And that's where that penetration came from, because all of Iowa's runs came slowly because you have to get all the way out to the C-gap. So penetration there, and then linebackers smashing the tight ends, not giving a shit about making a tackle, making Caleb Johnson bounce, or whoever the running back was, bounce to where the safety was. So what's amazing to me, again, the balls to make the adjustment. We're having difficulty stopping the run in the C-gap, right outside the tackle. You know what we should do? Move our guys farther from that point and leave that even more open. And then they managed to execute on that. Like, the balls of that adjustment, which really was between like the middle of the third quarter is when they started making that change and they played them way tighter. It wasn't so much the case in the first half. And they finally just kind of made that, hey, our 3 defensive linemen can beat their guard, center, guard. We just can't mess with the tackles, or we don't want to mess with tackles and those combo blocks. So like that adjustment that Iowa State made, there wasn't enough time for Iowa to make the counter adjustment to that before the game was already over. So like John Haycock, he doesn't get enough credit for how good of a scheme that entire defense was. Press, use Darian Porter 6'4" to press Reese Vanderzee 6'4". All right, cool. Put him, fight him. Go up, fight him. He doesn't know how to fight yet. He'll get there.
Big stop in the 2-point conversion.
Big stop in the 2-point conversion with Darian Porter. We're going to put Malik Verdun on Luke Lachey. Follow him around. Beat the shit out of him. He's going to push you, push him back. At the top of every route, Iowa tight ends are physical as hell. Match their physicality. Malik Verdun, check mark. Bo, you're going to have to fill down and hit a lot. You're going to have to hit Caleb Johnson, who's fast and 225. Nut up. He did. Defensive line, we're going to put you away from your assignment. You have to win. If we don't win on this defensive line assignment, this play is out the gate for 100 yards. They did. Like, the nuts to make the calls and adjustments they did, and the guys to actually execute it were absolutely insane.
Yeah.
All right.
That's why Hickok's the wizard, man.
Last game of the year. Can't hold anything back now. I don't know. That to me was the Iowa's offense didn't just forget how to run the ball. They ran the ball for...
They got out coached, man. And I
they
thought
did.
that too. They got out coached, out schemed, and Jalen Knoll has, the drive he had, like you said, he had an out route versus Castro. One play, got 10 yards. Next play, out route, whoop, skirt, down the sideline, and Castro jumped.
And Rocco threw an absolute just
dime
piss rocket.
Sure did.
That thing was 100 miles an hour. We do have to get a couple sponsors in. Did you have any Iowa pork during watching the game?
No, I didn't. Had burgers, had brats, but did not cook the brats because we had enough burgers and hot dogs, and he was also cooking ribs. So we had too much.
Did you have pork ribs?
Too much meat.
It was pork
No,
ribs?
they were pork ribs.
Pork,
Yeah,
there you
good
go.
call.
We had smoked pork ribs and pulled pork
Nice.
at our A+. A double plus.
There we go.
So shout out to the Iowa Pork Producers Association. The other sponsor that we got and that we got to shout out is how fun would it be to be a playoff team or like a multiple playoff team, and you get to kick off the season next year, and it's in Ireland, and it's Farmageddon. That the Aer Lingus College Football Classic next year, week 0. Go to cyclones2ireland.com, the number 2. So
Do you know what Aer Lingus' slogan is?
I don't want to know.
Don't be a dingus. Book with Aer Lingus.
Actually, I really like that.
Yeah, that's what they say.
Is if anyone from Aer Lingus
Don't
is
be a
listening,
dingus.
don't be a dingus.
Book with Aer Lingus.
Book with Aer Lingus.
Yeah.
Hoi, boyo, we're gonna go to Dublin. So yeah, cyclones2ireland.com. Anything else that you want to take away? We have a guest. We have a bye week this week, so next week we'll still have more Cyhawk because we're gonna be basking in this glow for a long time.
We're going to try to get another guest on next week, too, Hall of Famer. We'll see if he joins.
Massive human.
Yeah, I shouldn't tease because if he doesn't show up,
Yep.
I look bad, and I've done it before.
But we do have a guest this week.
We do.
As
Confirmed.
you probably saw in the title. Ari
Yeah,
Temkin.
it's not George Nang. You know,
It's not George Nang.
We got two. So I guess technically two guests. George is here for a quick bait. We got Ari Temkin.
We're trying to get George. Hey, George, if you're listening to this show, we want you on the show. If not during football season, especially during basketball season. I know you're a little bit busy, but hey, buddy.
George Yang is a free pass whenever he wants to come on the show.
Yeah,
He's very
free
welcome.
pass.
Free pass.
No matter what. We got a seat warm. We have
Don't make us revoke that free pass.
Aiden will do it. I've seen it.
So I swear to God.
I swear to God, I will revoke that pass. Okay, so we got Ari Temkin of Big 12 Radio on TuneIn to kind of get a little bit of a national perspective on what the Big 12 is so far through. It's 3 weeks, but
2.5 weeks.
Zero is a zero, and is zero a number?
Yeah, technically, I guess.
But zero is the absence of things. You know, like if
Ari
you
Temkin,
have.
everyone.
All right, we're gonna bring on Ari Temkin of Big 12 Radio on TuneIn. So to get a little national perspective, recurring guest, friend of the program. I think you're the first 3-time guest, so that's fun.
Yep.
Congratulations.
Wow. I had to beg to come on, so I appreciate it. Thank you.
Yeah, you were
He
like,
paid you, Jeff?
you're getting paid for this? So before we move on from Cyhawk, because we've been talking Cyhawk for like an hour now, when you're watching this down in Dallas, what's the feeling watching the game? Because I think from my perspective, I've always put my head in someone like a non-Iowa State but Big 12 representative. You need Iowa State to win this game because Iowa is going to finish towards the top half of the Big 10. Iowa State, if they finish towards the top half of the Big 12, then when you start comparing the apples to oranges by the time the season gets over and you go, well, does a Big 10 fourth or the Big 12 2 get in? Well, Iowa State beat Iowa at Kinnick, so maybe the Big 12 gets in. Notre Dame lost, so they might not. What was the reaction and what was the rooting interest from Dallas and or you as a Big 12 adjacent person?
Yeah. So number one, I mean, I'm always going to root for the Cyclones in that game. Being a Big 12 guy, being friends with Arch, all that stuff. And
That's former Cyclone quarterback and now Atlanta Falcons radio, Dave Archer.
Yeah. So, I mean, just based on that, I hate Iowa, right? So, historically, not much of a feeling towards either, I guess, Kansas and Iowa State in basketball, but for the most part, just always hated Iowa. My feeling was, boy, this game resembles a lot of these Cyhawk games we've seen of late. You hate this for Iowa State, man. What a brutal performance here on offense. We thought this would be a much more explosive offense. I don't know. It just felt like you look up and you're like, oh my God, they could win this game. And it just
13-7.
Like
at 13-7, you were like, oh shit.
Like
This is gonna happen.
This could actually happen. So I guess, and then they give the ball, they punt the ball back with 2.5 left. And you're like, well, that was a bad 3 and out. What's Iowa going to do here? Especially with the way the running game was going. Like it's crazy. I really did not feel like they were going to win this game at any point of the game until the kick went through. I mean, it really, like, at no point. I mean, they got the ball with 21 seconds left to no timeouts, or 31 seconds left to no timeouts, having to go 30, 40 yards. And luckily, and the one guy you can't let behind you, Iowa, have you watched any film? Do not let Jalen Noel get behind you. What are you doing?
That was such a beautiful route, which not for nothing. Anyway.
And there's so much beauty to this because, so I guess in the last 5 years, Iowa State hasn't scored more than 17 points in this game. And the fact that it was 19-17 with them getting the ball, it's like they needed to score more than 17 to win the game. It was just crazy. Winning 2 of the last 3 in Kinnick, having lost 7 of 8 coming in is huge. I think there's so many pieces to this, like just from obviously winning this game is huge, but from like a 30,000 foot view, Campbell, this was like the Campbell couldn't win this game. Now he's won 2 of 3, both in Kinnick. And then again, the way that they did it, this was an offensive explosion. The game hit the over for the first time in forever. They got to 20 points. We saw what this passing offense is capable of. And I think the thing that stands out more than anything is, man, Rocco Becht is such a gamer. It just doesn't matter what's happened throughout the course of the rest of the game. Give him another chance, another shot at it, and he's gonna make a good throw. He's just so mentally tough. He doesn't let previous issues or mistakes bother him at all. I mean, it's just like grip it and rip it. And let's go.
So the entire discussion all offseason, really, I mean, still to this point, has been that the Big 12 is a 1-bid conference, and I'm not campaigning that it will be a 2-bid conference, but you got to think Notre Dame losing a game they shouldn't lose
To not just a game they shouldn't lose.
to a G5 team.
They were 28.5 point favorites to a mid-major, whatever you want to call it, at home. Like when you start comparing apples to apples, I mean, yeah.
Yeah. So not only that, but Notre Dame also has to go to USC. They're at Purdue this week. They host Louisville. They also go, I think, to Georgia Tech. So they have probably another 2 losses in their schedule. So I got to think Notre Dame's out. And then, obviously Iowa State beats Iowa, so Big 12 over Big 10. Oklahoma State beats Arkansas, so Big 12 over SEC. And then also Arizona State beat Mississippi State, I believe. So another Big 12 over SEC.
Let's not bring up that Kansas lost to a Big 10 school and Illinois and probably a mid to lower tier Big 10 school. We can just brush by that one.
Yeah, I wasn't going to talk about the losses that happened this week. But my point is that, with the college football playoffs and just how, everyone said the Big 12 is a one bid conference. Every week matters. And so this week, I think, was kind of a big week. So with that being said, do you think that there's a better chance now that the Big 12 could get 2 teams in? Because, like I said, everyone has said the entire time it's a one bid conference. Do you think it's still the case?
So I think, and you guys know this, like in football, especially early on, we love to speak in absolutes. And like 2 weeks in, like, man, do people love their absolutes? And I'll tell you something, Notre Dame is absolutely not out of the CFP picture as much as we don't want to hear that. Did you guys see the latest AP Top 25?
Where are they at?
Still in there.
See where Notre Dame is? They're ahead of Iowa State, aren't they?
Yeah.
Like in no world is that possible? Like,
But for now, like I said, I think they still lose 2 more games.
Well, and we'll see. But I mean, and then I'm sure the pollsters will say, well, I mean, they lost to a top 25 team in Northern Illinois who got into the top 25 simply by beating Notre Dame. It's crazy. I mean, they're going to give them every opportunity to get back in. And I think the Big 12 is the exact opposite. Like they're going to give them every opportunity to not get an extra bid. It's a perception thing. It's a branding thing. I mean, Notre Dame just continually throws up all over itself in these moments. I mean, I remember reading an article this summer that came out that was like, what's your most recent BCS or like New Year's Six bowl win? And for Notre Dame, it goes back like to the 90s. They keep getting put in these spots and they keep losing over and over and over again. It's insane. And I want to believe they're going to lose a couple more times, but I don't know. Maybe they put together a streak and they win a bunch of games. Suddenly they're playing USC at the end of the year. And it's like, they're back in the playoff picture. Like Notre Dame gets every chance to get back in the playoff picture. I hope you're right. And I hope they lose some more of these games so that they're firmly out. But I just don't believe it yet. It's like the shredder. You just got to keep beating them until they're dead because they're never going to be dead. And it's a perception thing. And I think again, as much as it works out for the Notre Dame, it works in the opposite way for the Big 12. Again, in the absolutes category, like we don't, week 1, we thought like, what a bad loss for Houston to UNLV. And it was, but then they go back and nearly beat Oklahoma in one of the ugliest football games you'll ever see. Now Kansas and UNLV play. So like if Kansas loses 2 straight, suddenly UNLV has 2 big wins. How good is that? I think we have perceptions of teams when the season starts and, you look at the first couple of weeks of the season and was the Pitt loss a bad loss for Cincinnati? I think Pitt's pretty good. Pitt looks a lot better this year than they've looked, and we'll find out this week when Pitt plays West Virginia. So no matter how you shake it, the Iowa State win is the biggest win of the conference play. So the biggest win for the conference so far this year. And that's not going to change. That's going to be a big win. But in terms of the other ones, I just don't know because we don't know how the rest of the season shakes out in terms of how good or how bad these wins or these losses are. I'll say this. I think Tulane is a better team than Illinois. So I think Kansas State's win over Tulane is probably a better win than, Kansas losing to Illinois. But again, we just don't know this until this thing shakes out. When K-State lost to Tulane a few years ago, it looked like a really bad loss. And suddenly you look up and, that's a New Year's Six team. So, if Tulane ends up being a playoff team out of the group of 5 or, Washington State, who just boat raced Texas Tech, my God, they're a mess right now. Then we'll see. But this is just a time of year where people want to speak in absolutes. And it's like they want to do things where it's like eliminate this team, eliminate that team. And I think we just see it too often where teams come back. I mean, Oklahoma State was 1-2 last year, and they ended up winning the Big 12 championship.
I think
playing in the Big 12 title game.
So one of the things that I would say is now it's very much in Iowa State's favor over a lot of other teams in the potential at-large pool. Is I think you're talking with like when they're speaking in the absolutes, there's the preseason. And then usually there's like the non-conference to sort of shake the rust off of what that preseason speculation would be. So let's say that, I don't know, Texas Tech, using them as an example, because I don't think either one of us thought that Texas Tech was going to be really good. Some people drank the Kool-Aid. So people, Texas Tech's going to be really good.
I think they lose to North Texas this
So,
week, for the record.
but either way, so let's say they go 1-2. But then like the Oklahoma State from last year, it took until like week 10 before people were like, Oklahoma State's real. So there's like 3 phases of sort of perception.
Yep.
And Iowa State had sort of like peripheral, like, they're going to be good. They're in the top, 6 or 8 or whatever. But then I think you get like 5-6 weeks into the season. And if you're undefeated or a 1-loss team 5 or 6 weeks in, then you start becoming like, oh, you're one of the darlings. You got a chance, which gives you a little bit more forgiveness versus being a team that has 2 losses right out of the gate and wins the rest. So Iowa State's next schedule, and Aiden, correct me if I'm wrong, but it's at home against Arkansas State after this bye week. Then they're at Houston and then at home against Baylor.
And then they go to West Virginia.
And they go to West Virginia. They could realistically go to West Virginia 5-0. And if they're 5-0 with a win against Iowa, currently ranked number 21, there's going to be some shaking out. That's probably a 12th ranked Iowa State team.
Iowa's out of the rankings now. Iowa State's 21.
Iowa will be ranked. Like, who are we kidding? They're going to be ranked. But they beat Iowa. They would have had, 3 other wins at this point, assuming that you get through the teams that you should beat. You're going to be 7.5 point plus favorites at each one of those games. You go to West Virginia, that's going to be one of the highlighted games because West Virginia is generally, lost to Penn State. We'll see how they do against Pitt. But that could be sort of a mini marquee game. You come out of that 6-0. Let's say you beat West Virginia. The back half of Iowa State's schedule is where the difficulty starts. You play UCF, you play Utah, you play Kansas State. But
Kansas, don't forget Kansas.
And Kansas.
Show some respect.
Kansas. But that's where all the tough games are. You start bringing attention to those tough games, and then you're not trying to be the Oklahoma State and come back from the perception pits. You're kind of starting as like the 10th or 12th team. So like it feels like Iowa State has the chance to be one of those pseudo darlings if they get to be 5-6-0 because of how the schedule shakes out, because they got through Iowa. So like I don't know what Kansas State's schedule and Utah's schedule and stuff like that is, but it feels like there's going to be a few teams that are 5 or 6-0 in the Big 12, which kind of make their way into the top 15, 10, which makes it hard to then justify jumping somebody ahead of them in the rankings as an at-large. So I don't know. I don't know if there's necessarily a question in there, but it feels like Iowa State is in decent position because the easier half of your schedule's early to become an undefeated team in the middle of the season, to then have to have consequential games later.
One thing I do want to say, if I can interject before Ari speaks here, is Oklahoma State and Utah play not this week, but the next week. And Utah goes to Spencer Petras-led Utah State this week. And Cam Rising just hurt his throwing hand, so he's already hurt. I don't think it's going to be that serious. I bet he'll be rested for Utah State and probably play versus Oklahoma State. But that right there will eliminate...
Not eliminate, but like make a substantial blemish.
Bump them back. Yeah, potentially bump them back behind Iowa State, whoever loses that game.
Well, I think, Jeff, what you're saying is, what if this league is top heavy?
Yeah.
Right. I mean, that's because we've seen the Big 12 be not so top heavy, have a lot of parity. And, in the preseason, that's certainly what it looked like it would be. But I guess to your point, like there's a possibility here that it's not going to be. That it's going to be more top heavy, which I do think would benefit this league in terms of being, a 2-bid league. The problem is, I don't know how we notate top heavy, from a perception standpoint. We know what that looks like. Mm-hmm. It's just whether or not like the public views K-State and Iowa State in that way. Now they certainly do for Utah. But I think you guys both like you just pointed out, like Cam Rising already took an injury. They think he's going to be fine. They've got Utah State. We'll see if he comes back, but like, it's 2 games and he's already dealing with an injury, right? And so what does this portend in the future? Do we think he's going to stay healthy? He's going to take more hits. The guy likes to run. In the situation where he was trying to throw the ball away, but kind of held on to it, like he just runs into issues a lot of times trying to get rid of the football. And even though they've tried to help him do the right things, he's just still constantly putting himself in harm's way. So can he, like, are we confident that he's going to be able to stay upright for all these games? I do think from a perception standpoint, a public standpoint, that Utah needs to be one of the top in terms of being top heavy for this league because they're just thought of very highly. They are really good. They should have absolutely demolished Baylor. The fact that game wasn't as out of hand as the score would indicate, they just kind of pulled the reins. They put Zach Wilson's brother in, Isaac Wilson, who's the true freshman quarterback for them. They put him in the second half because of the rising injury and just pulled the reins back and we're like, we're just not going to do anything. That was one of those games where like you didn't have to watch the second half. Watch the first half of that game and you knew everything that was going to happen in the game. But at no point did I ever feel like Baylor had any shot. So like I think Utah has the potential to be really good. It's just, again, whether or not Rising can stay healthy. And then to your point, like if Iowa State starts to climb up the rankings here, and we'll see how that happens. I mean, Arkansas State plays at the Big House this weekend. Yeah. So very fortuitous bounce for Iowa State here. Sucks for Arkansas State, but I don't know. I don't think Michigan's all that good. Now they may take out their emotions on Arkansas State this weekend, but I think you're right from the standpoint of UCF. Look at their schedule. So like that UCF Iowa State game could be huge. That could be a ranked versus ranked game. And UCF's running game is very dynamic. I mean, they had a 1,400-yard rusher in R.J. Harvey, and they added Penny Boone, who's a 1,400-yard rusher too. And now they're playing him in the fourth quarter and getting R.J. Harvey to run in the first three quarters. It's what they're able to do with their running game is very, very difficult. So I guess I'm kind of buying what you're saying, Jeff, that like this could be a year in which maybe the league isn't as top to bottom as good as we thought it was, which makes it more top heavy, which helps out the opportunity to get a second bid. I just think where we sit today after week 2, again, I'm not going to speak in absolutes, but it's just hard for me to see a situation which the league gets multiple bids. It has nothing to do with the league. It's everything to do with perception league. And, and that's, I hate to say this because it's the worst thing to say because it doesn't mean anything, but it is what it is at this point in time.
But do you think the league would benefit from being top heavy? Because I mean, you can do that, or
100%. Yeah.
Or you could just cannibalize everyone. So like Oklahoma State plays Utah, and then the next week they play Kansas State. So if there's like if they beat Utah but then lose to Kansas State, it's like, okay, then Oklahoma State and Utah are now.
I think you kind of want that. Like that's what the SEC and the Big Ten have had for forever. Like the Big Ten, Michigan and Ohio State have been really good, and then there's been sometimes another team like the Kenneth Walker Michigan State team or the odd Penn State team that sometimes pops in here or there, or an Iowa team. And what was it when they went undefeated? Like you have every once in a while a third team that kind of creeps in there, but it's 2 teams. And then everyone says
Miss in the SEC.
Everyone says, oh, the conference is so good. Like no, Ohio State and Michigan are really good. Right. The Big Ten is okay. And the SEC has sort of had the same thing. Now the SEC this year with Texas, Georgia, Alabama, those are your 3 best teams in the country right now. For my money, I think I don't trust Will Howard to be the Ohio State kind of guy to take him where. But like you have 3 teams, and then do we trust Ole Miss? Ole
Miss, Missouri, Tennessee.
Do we trust Missouri? Tennessee is going to be really good. So like, yeah, you got 4 or 5 teams, but they're so top heavy. Like Mississippi State is garbage. They got smoked by Arizona State, and Arizona State is an okay team. Like I don't want to underestimate Arizona State. Maybe Dillingham's going to be able to actually turn this into something, but Mississippi State is a bottom feeder. They are bad.
Arkansas might be okay though. They put up 70. I don't know who they played the first game. They put up 70 though, and they got Bobby Petrino as their offensive coordinator.
Stay off the motorcycles. But
stay away from the young ladies too.
And Jaquindon Jackson, the former Utah running back, is a stud. I mean, he ran all over Oklahoma State.
But like that's what the SEC and the Big Ten have done. Now the Big 12 had the opportunity with that, and Oklahoma had been the one that kind of always took advantage of that. And then there wasn't really another team like Iowa State when they went to the Fiesta Bowl and Kansas State when they did it every once in a while. But like I feel like it is beneficial if you have a smaller amount of teams that are way towards the top and you have some trash there, the other team that those top teams can beat, which makes me hope that Texas Tech stays this disoriented, that a Kansas, Jaden Daniels can't figure it out. Like for me as an Iowa State fan, and I think as the Big 12 broadly, it's better if you have some worse teams for the better teams to beat up on. To move on from that a little bit, now that if we're talking about whether it's 1 or 2 bid leagues, how are we handicapping now the Big 12 generally? Because it feels like from that list of like 8 or so teams that we had before the year, we've dropped some of those off the list. Again, overreacting after week 2. But how are we handicapping kind of like a top half of the conference? Who's going to be in the Big 12 championship game or who's going to win the Big 12?
And by the way, let me just quickly, you think about that 2011 Oklahoma State team. I know you think about them a lot, Woody. I mean, that's a year where this league with 12 teams probably gets 2 bids. As opposed to getting 0 bids in a 2-team playoff in 2011, they probably get 2 bids in 2024 with 2. So like just to echo your point, that it was a top heavy league that year with two really good teams, and neither got in because it was a 2-team playoff that they kind of cannibalized each other. But I think in a year in which there's 12 teams, that we get 2 bids. Sorry, what was your second question?
Handicapping the Big 12.
After 2 weeks?
Yeah. After what we've seen. Now, assuming that all teams improve at the same rate. So not saying that like, oh, Houston is going to, or whatever, Texas Tech's going to really figure it out. Well, if Texas Tech figures it out, then Kansas State might figure it out the same amount. So assuming that everyone figures it out the same way.
And will Neil Brown be on the hot seat by week 9?
Well, yeah, and I picked West Virginia to win the conference, and after 2 weeks, it doesn't look great. So I think let's go with kind of like preseason expectations: Utah, K-State, Iowa State. Now, most people I think had Utah and K-State at the top of the conference. I think people that knew probably had Iowa State closer to the top of the conference, but probably in that second tier. But I would say through 2 weeks, those 3 teams look as strong as we thought they were going to be in the preseason.
I think for me, I would put UCF in that camp too.
Okay.
I'm just saying, the talent there and Gus Malzahn.
Their quarterback has looked just a step better than McNamara. So
no, and that's a tough one because to Woody's point, like, man, they've got, first of all, they got the 2 running backs we talked about in Penny Boone and RJ Harvey. And then they've got the 2 speedsters that and then you employ, you employ those guys under Gus Malzahn's system. And it's almost like, I don't even care that KJ Jefferson's not good. But also, UCF, all those other teams, I think, have played games against opponents that you can learn a little bit something from, whereas UCF probably hasn't yet. Again, who knows how good Tulane's going to be? I think Tulane's probably pretty good. They can run the football well, and they've got a young quarterback that's made some mistakes in that game that were forced, by a really smart defensive coordinator, defensive-minded coach, and Chris Kleiman. And then Utah, you could argue about how difficult the Baylor game was, given that it was in Salt Lake, and Baylor's not very good. I'm a believer in Arizona State. Again, I'm not sure they played anybody. Wyoming did not look good week 2, and Mississippi State probably isn't very good. But I'm looking for a team 2 weeks in that's got an identity. They are disruptive up front on defense, and they can run the football. And I like Sam Levitt. Is he an elite passer? No, but I think he's good enough and can use his legs enough to keep defenses honest. And again, when you've got the running game that they've got with Scadaboo, that guy's a maniac. So I'm not trying to say that Arizona State's suddenly going to be competing for this conference, but I had Arizona State picked as one of the,
the bottom feeders,
one of the worst teams in the conference, 15 or 16. And after 2 weeks, I could comfortably say they're not going to be. Cincinnati, I hate to pile on Scott Satterfield, but man, that 26-7-6 blowout, they were beating Pitt 27-6, and they let Pitt come all the way back. And I thought there were some issues by Satterfield at the end of the game. I don't know why he didn't call timeouts to save some time when Pitt was clearly in field goal range. Just far too many mistakes where I'm just not comfortable with Cincinnati yet.
Arizona,
well, and that's where, so K-State, Arizona on Friday night.
Yep.
And
I think we're going to
that's
learn
a game,
lot
I
about
think,
both.
Yep.
And that's a game I think conference wise, you probably need K-State to win. It's a non-conference game.
Yeah,
it's not one of those.
Yeah. It's weird.
But it just feels like whoever has K-State right now is the driver's seat to have more upside for that top heaviness. And so I think they've got to win that game. But Avery Johnson, I think, had 2 really good throws. His first touchdown pass was incredible in the game against Tulane. And then I think he had another great throw later on in the game, but he's got to improve. And their running game is so good. So I just wonder, can they win in a shootout, which might need to happen in the Arizona game. So that's a huge one. So I'm trying to think who else. Kansas was the team that was thought to be the top of the conference. What we saw from Jalen Daniels on Saturday is just not good enough. He did not give them a chance to win that football game. Their defense played pretty good. Their running game was good. I think Jeff Grimes, they're dealing with some Andy Kotelnicki blues here because Jeff Grimes went away from the running game. They had a lead and had 2 running backs averaging at least 6 yards a carry in that game, and Highshaw and Neal. And I think Highshaw only ended up with 7 carries. That's coaching malpractice for a guy to be averaging 6 yards a carry and get 7 carries in the game. And same with Neal. I think he had like 13 or 14 carries, was averaging 7 yards a carry. You have a lead. It's not like you're trying to come back down 2 touchdowns. You're winning the game. What are you doing with a quarterback that can't throw? So I think I'm fired up about the game on Saturday. So it's just coming. And by the way, Iowa State plays at Kansas in a game that will be in Kansas City. I keep reminding people of this. It's at Arrowhead. That place is going to be that will
so
be
many
a
cyclones.
Neutral site
so
at
many
best.
Cyclones.
Yeah.
In that game.
So that's not a home game for KU. So yeah. So and then by the way, in the on on the resume, it'll look like a road win at Kansas. So it'll look even better than it is if Iowa State wins that game. So I think after 2 weeks, I'm not, and it's not like Jalen Daniels looked good one weekend. So it's a long way to say, like, I think Iowa State has drastically improved its standing in terms of the national picture. I think we all thought they should be at the top. Some were brave enough to pick them at the top, but they're definitely 2 weeks in. They've got the best win so far through 2 weeks of the Big 12. And I mean, look, I think great game plan. Second half of the game, they brought a ton of pressure. I think their defensive line was disruptive. I mean, John Haycock he's unbelievable. It really is incredible. It doesn't matter who's in there. Woody, we talked this week about how big of a loss Caleb Bacon would be. They were down to their 5th, 6th, 7th linebackers. It doesn't matter. In a year where they graduated all their core of that defense from a few years ago, they come back and they've got as good of a defense as they had the year before. It's insane how good he is at scheming, getting the right guys in position. Because it's like, who's Orange? Oh yeah, he has a huge,
Big citrus, baby.
So many of these guys that you just don't expect. And again, you're thinking like, oh, their linebackers are down. I heard a lot of people picking this game this week that are like, Iowa State, it's gonna be tough without Bacon, without their linebackers. It's like, if you haven't been paying attention, John Haycock, it doesn't matter the personnel. He gets those guys ready to play, and they always play above their capabilities every single week, every single year.
I'm gonna say something that I haven't even run by Jeff, and you guys both might disagree with me on this. I think
Grant's hot takes.
I think this is Kirk Ferentz's last year. I think he retires after this year.
Based on what?
Well, they lose about
forced retirement, or like he's like, you know what? I think it's time for me to step aside.
I think he's going to step aside because this is the last year that Iowa's for the first at least next 2 years that their schedule is as powder puffy as it is, and they lose just about everybody. Next year they'll have like 5 or 6 returning starters. But if you look at their 2025 schedule, they have to play at Iowa State, at USC, at Wisconsin, at Nebraska, and at Rutgers, which they're okay. They host Indiana, who's looked good so far this year, and they might get the top quarterback in this next recruiting class. They also host Michigan State, Penn State, Minnesota, Oregon, and Florida Atlantic, who's coached by Tom Herman. So like they could go 6-6 or worse there. And then if you look at the 2026 schedule, they play Northern Illinois. Then they host Iowa State. They're at Illinois, at Washington, at Michigan, at Minnesota. They host Wisconsin, Northern Iowa, which usually is pretty tough, but they'll probably still beat them. Ohio State, Nebraska, and Purdue. So Iowa's schedule gets a lot harder after this year, and I think Kirk is just one of those old school coaches that he doesn't really like the transfer portal. He got in trouble this year, in quotes, this year for recruiting.
Put himself in timeout.
McNamara, a trash can with arms, basically. They paid him $750,000 for that. So
does he have arms? Jury's still out of that.
He has 2 arms and no legs.
He doesn't have legs, yeah.
He has 2 arms and no legs.
Yeah. So, and I'm not sure either of those arms can throw. He should try throwing left-handed. Maybe he's better that way. But that's my hot take, that Iowa has been able to hide behind a weak Big Ten West for so long. This schedule this year is essentially a Big Ten West, schedule. And then next year and the years after that is when, okay, you can't hide behind this anymore. And I think Kirk wants to, maintain his legacy of being a great coach. He is, which he is a great coach. And so I think he retires this year because he doesn't want to be exposed, which is the same reason why Lincoln Riley left Oklahoma to go to USC, because he thought, oh, the Pac-12 is easy. I'm going to go there and win it. And now they're in the Big Ten and they look okay so far, but
they have a defense.
I'm not convinced.
USC can tackle now.
Yep. Their defense giving up 10 points a game after 2 weeks, which is not bad, considering they open up against LSU, which I don't think we've ever. Right. I mean, I don't think we've ever seen a Lincoln Riley defense give up 20 points over 2 games. So that's impressive. I mean, it's with these coaches, and you guys know this, like their egos are so large, it's just hard for me to think that like any of them have the wherewithal to like think through that in a reasonable way. That's not like, but actually I'm Kirk Ferentz and I'm a monster. I'm amazing. I'm the greatest thing since Hayden Fry. And I have to stay, you know what I mean? Like I buy everything you just said and it all makes all the sense in the world. But with that being said, the ego part of it, it's just so hard. These guys, they never know when to walk away. It's so rare. It happens so rarely that guys know when to walk away. And I think ego is the biggest reason for that. And look, I think one of the like most underappreciated things just about these conferences moving forward is we have these expectations of these teams based on preset alignments in the conferences. Like to your point, like Iowa has done a great job in a really bad Big Ten West. But like what happens now, they've got to play Washington and they got to play, Ohio State and Penn State consistently, Wisconsin. So like, I totally agree with your point. I just think like so much of the preconceived notions we have about these conferences will go out the window this year because of the differences in the conferences now and how drastic they are.
It's another thing that's just one example of the difference in conference, which I don't know if it's necessarily totally a difference in conference. I think Oregon is off to a really weird start. So they barely squeaked by Idaho. They beat Boise State, which for my money, I think Boise State is your group of 5.
Their running back is nasty.
Jeanty, or I think Jeanty. I don't know how you necessarily pronounce it. That dude, he scored what, 9 touchdowns so far in 2 games?
He's a stud.
I'm like 500 yards rushing.
I think I read a story, I think it's like a CBS Sports, something like that in the offseason. He turned down like an $800,000 or $1 million NIL offer to stay in Boise because he felt like they could do something special. Good for him. But it feels like Oregon is a team that is getting a little bit of the Notre Dame treatment, that they're there because of their reputation, not because of their actual performance. And like, they're somehow still in the top 10. They looked average at best. I think Dylan Gabriel threw for like 200 yards on like 50 attempts against Idaho at home. And then the week after that, they give up 3 touchdowns against Boise State and they win by 7. They had to scrape to actually get that done at home. Now, at some point, Oregon is going to have to play a game where they're going to have to win it. They can't just like scoot by. And I don't know, like, I hope, and this is more the rational centrist in me, that everyone can come back to the middle and not think about how they've done things before, is at some point, if a team is average, we stop benefiting them, we stop giving them the benefit of the doubt. And it feels like the CFP committee is better at that than like the AP rankings and stuff like that, but they're influenced by the AP rankings. So like, I feel like Oregon is a team that, like Notre Dame, they and like Michigan right now, because Michigan does not deserve the ranking, even any ranking that they have, barely squeaking by Fresno, getting the brakes beat off them by Texas, who called off the Dogs in the middle of the 3rd quarter. It feels like there are certain teams that are getting by in reputation that I feel like will eventually fall off.
So I don't disagree with you at all. And by the way, you want to see an incredible line. You might mention Gabriel throwing for 243 on 21 attempts. How about Maddox Madsen, Boise State's quarterback, throwing for 148 yards on 40 attempts?
Holy smokes. Oh boy.
That's not good.
That's a
3.7 yards per attempt.
Not even completions per attempt.
Yeah, you're right. Per attempt. And GT, by the way, was 25 of 192. My question is, why do you throw the ball 40 times?
Hand it to Jeanty. Just give it to him. He's going to make something happen.
I think Tim Lester might have been coaching them.
Arkansas's quarterback was at Boise State. He transferred. Taylor Green transferred from Boise State to Arkansas, and he's from Louisville in the Dallas area. He's a stud too. I mean, it's kind of surprising they weren't better given the running ability of both Green and Jeanty. But that, I think your point's well stated on Oregon. Here's the difference, though, for me between all of these Big Ten teams that we think are just constantly overrated. And it's the point you just made about Iowa. And that is, you can't there's no hiding in this slate now, and especially given, the cross-country travel that you've got to do. I mean, Oregon's got to play at Ohio State, or no, they host Ohio State, but they've got to play at the Big House. Like, they've got to play at Camp Randall. So I just think we're not totally playing up how difficult it's going to be to travel to those kinds of games, and just the difficulty of of the Big Ten specifically. Brett McMurphy from Action Network had a great article that came out last week that showed like who had to travel the furthest in college football this year. And I was surprised to find out that there were no Big 12 teams in the top 10 of that list. It was all ACC and Big 10 teams, and then Hawaii, who basically travels more than the circumference of the earth this year for its 5 road games, literally. But so I just think that part of this, like, that will take care of itself. Now, if we get to week 9 and week 10, and suddenly you're looking at the CFP rankings and Oregon's got 3 losses and they're in the top 20, then yeah, you're probably right. But it's going to be very interesting to see how much of a difference these new conference alignments have in terms of that thing you're talking about, which is perception. Because look, Oregon could hide in the Pac-12 previously, right? And Oregon's loading up
top heavy.
Yeah, they would have they'd have one bad loss and they'd always be in the picture at the end of the year, because it's like, well, they just feasted on UCLA and on Cal and all these bad teams. that's just not the case anymore. The Big Ten, I think, like they grew and they got their alignment, and they were able to get a huge TV deal. But I think their growth is like, it's going to kill itself in a way. Like they're going to eat themselves in a way just because of that travel and so many unknowns. And you got Michigan going cross country and Ohio State going cross country. And I mean, going to Maryland has to go to Oregon. And I mean, some of these teams. So like, that is just insane to me. I think that comes out in the wash over time.
Yeah, I think so too. I'm just, this is the most interesting season to me. And like, this year feels it's going to feel the most like college basketball. And one of the beauty things about college basketball is that, when you're obviously last year, and then like, I think we all expect this year, and you as a Kansas guy, you expect your team to be at the top. And if like Iowa State's 1, 2, 3, even 4, you're like, oh, they can compete for the championship. But if your team is like 5, 6, 7, or 8, normally in basketball, you go, we're still in it. We can still be an 11 seed versus like, making the tournament sort of thing. There's 68 teams that get in there versus in college football, up until this season, you lose once, you're like hanging on by a thread. You lose twice, you're dead, done, totally gone. And like, it feels like this is the first year that there's going to be teams that are in like 5th place in their conference that are like, there's still a chance,
right?
The 3rd place team in the Big 12, the 5th place team in the Big 12 or the Big 10, like the 3 teams or whatever that are going to end up rising to the top in the ACC. And there's going to be so many teams that have meaningful games later in the year that I think it's going to be more fun this year to watch more games and being like, oh, Ohio State, Michigan determines the whole playoff. That's cool. Now it's like Ohio State, Michigan, that's going to determine part of it. And then this Iowa State, Kansas State game over here, and this Georgia Tech, Florida State game, Syracuse, that game over there, that's going to have something to do with it. And it feels like there's going to be more impactful games throughout the season. So I don't know. I'm just excited to just continue watching football, especially now that Iowa State got over their first major hurdle and now are kind of on to the next quarter of their season where they go after the bye week, they go Houston, Baylor, West Virginia. That next quarter of the season, it's fun to look forward to.
Yeah, and so a couple of points. Number one, you're not wrong. The only thing I'll say is, like when I used to do the Cowboys pregame, postgame show, and we always joked that like it's a must-win game until the next week when it's another must-win game, because that's the NFL, right? Like, every week is like a must-win game because so many teams are in the playoff chase, and you get to it, you're like, man, they're 5-5. They have to win this game to stay in the playoff picture. Then you look 3 weeks later and they're still in the playoff picture, and then they lost 2 games. So it's like, the joke being like, you're never really out of it. And there's no really must win games until you literally must win. Otherwise you're eliminated. But that's the way the NFL dials it up. And I think like college football has always existed in this different space where you had to win all your games in order to control your own destiny. And, and all those games were must win games. And now it's like, going like Ole Miss will lose to Georgia and to Alabama and still get in, and then lose to Georgia or Alabama again in the playoff. And Penn State will lose to Michigan and Ohio State and get in and still lose to Michigan or Ohio State in the playoff. But with all that being said, the second point I wanted to make was kind of like what we were just talking about, which is, so I just made some assumptions based on previous history, which is, Ole Miss is that 3rd team and they're up in that upper tier. They'll get a playoff spot in a 12-team playoff, but are they really going to be able to beat an Alabama or a Georgia when it gets down to it, right? But I think that's the beauty of this year. We don't know the impact that these leagues changing will have on the leagues and on our perceptions of the leagues. The Big 12, guys, is a completely different league. Okay. A year ago, 4 new teams came in. This year, 4 new teams came in, which means within a year, half the league is new. That's a brand new league. So the Big 10 has all these West Coast teams now and all these East Coast teams now, like that, the travel week to week, like there's going to be some wild upsets of the Big 10 just based on travel and who you're playing one week versus the next week. So again, go back to like my first point about, we're finally like college football is finally existing in the playoff space that we, like every other sport in America inhibits, lives in. But with that being said, like we don't really know the implications of these leagues growing and ballooning and what that means. The perceptions and previous thoughts of how these leagues have existed and like how they're going to be, like that's going to go out the window again. Like, oh, Iowa is going to be a team that's going to be competing towards the top of the Big 10 and trying to get to a Big 10 championship. I don't know if that's going to be the case anymore, right? Like these things that we've kind of always held true Penn State, Iowa, Ole Miss, some of these other ones. It's like, man, these leagues are so different now. We got to like throw out any of our perceptions because of the 12-team playoff. And again, because you've got these huge, ginormous leagues.
That's really a shame if Iowa's no longer in the Big Ten picture.
Yeah, that
Shoot.
would be all too bad. Well, it's
You hate to see it.
yeah. Well, we've taken up too much of your time. That's Ari Temkin, Big 12 Radio on TuneIn.
Yeah,
Thanks for coming on.
Thank you guys. I appreciate it very much. Go download the TuneIn app and then search Big 12 and favorite the channel there, because it's the only place where you can get, aside from Cyclone Fanatic and Ear Sports and many of these other local publications that do a fantastic job of covering your teams. TuneIn's the only place to get Big 12 coverage. SiriusXM doesn't have live Big 12 radio anymore. ESPN, all these other networks, they're moving away from Big 12 coverage. So support TuneIn and Big 12 Radio because it's the only place we got that's left right now from a national perspective. Appreciate you guys.
Rate, review. You know what they say?
I just need a heart. That's all I need. Just a heart. Just heart my channel, please. It shows up too. Like it says how many have hearted it. So it's like, you could see how many hearts it has. And so at this point, it's like we're trailing Garth Brooks by only like 100,000 hearts.
Oh,
so
come on.
Yeah.
Who's Garth Brooks?
Who's Garth Brooks?
All right. Well, thanks, Ari, for coming on.
Yeah, we appreciate it. Thank you.
Man, it feels good to be a Cyclone. It's just when you're getting love from everybody. I mean, Ari's he's very pro Cyclone, but you're just getting love from everybody. It just feels nice.
Yeah, it does. And I'm sure he's, a little heartbroken that his Jayhawks lost, but then also like, okay, cool. My Cyclone friends won.
Yeah. So I think we're in good family down there. I was wearing my Drake Bulldog hat. Save it to the end because I didn't want to like take any shine away from it. Big win. Huge win for the Drake Bulldogs. They're actually now just 1-0 because their first game actually got lightninged out and it was a no contest. They would have been 2-0. 1-0. They went out to Eastern Washington, which is like the same level as UNI. It's where Cooper Kupp came from,
Yeah.
the ones with the red turf. Drake got paid almost $300,000 to go out to Eastern Washington
Beat that ass.
and whoop their ass in overtime, 35-32. That is a huge, huge win. The last two teams they played that were at that level, they got beat 55-7 and 55-3. That was last year against North Dakota and North Dakota State, respectively. And now they went out to Eastern Washington, whooped that ass, 35-32 in overtime, are now 1-0, and is the first non-conference win for Drake since 2021.
Wow. Yeah, good for them. That was a big win. And I think I saw they're projected to win their conference.
Yeah, they won it last year. They were undefeated in the conference last year. Them and St. Thomas out of Minnesota are the two teams, and then Davidson, the Fighting Steph Currys, are kind of the other team that's always in it. But Drake is the definite betting favorite to win.
Sweet. Good on them. Go
Go
Bulldogs.
Bulldogs. Yeah, go Bulldogs, go Cyclones. We're recording this before the Monday Night Football game. Brees.
Go Brees. Go Brock.
Brees and Brock.
Go Will.
And Will.
Go
and Allen. And Kanae's in the practice
Go
squad. So go Cyclones.
Go Cyclones, yeah. I got nothing else. Thank you to all of our loyal listeners who are still listening. And as always, remember, adapt. Don't shop.